Hi, I'm Ken Howard, and welcome to the Gay Therapy LA podcast. Today, I want to talk about a secular appreciation of Christmas. The holiday season is many things for many people because, as a world culture, it's the time of year when the peoples of many, but not all, nations around the world, symbols and customs and rituals reflect observance of Christmas in areas of the world that used to be called somewhat quaintly Christendom, or nations where Christianity is practiced as the dominant religion. In addition to the season's religious significance, it's also a festive time of year that marks a new calendar year, although this is not the only world calendar. For Americans, the season is also rife with extremes of emotions, often celebratory, but in my role as a psychotherapist, I also see the other side of it, when emotions can include loneliness, frustration, and depression. For gay men like me, and I've been a specialist therapist for gay men for 27 years now, it can also be a mixed time of year as we negotiate the season from the perspective of our families of origin and also our families of choice, meaning other LGBT people and our allies who form our everyday social relationships, either in addition to or in place of the family of origin where we were raised. Holidays that are primarily religious in nature can be times when gay men can feel conflicted. We are products of our families of origin, which are often, but not always, led by heterosexual couples, and there are times when we are celebrating such holidays with our parents, siblings, and others, perhaps with an emphasis more on family events than the religious aspect itself. And gay men frequently are found to have a rather tenuous relationship with religious holidays because we have a tenuous relationship with religion itself. Because certainly in the United States, but also in many other countries, many religions, but particularly Islam and Christianity, literally have blood on their collective hands for the atrocities committed in the name of such religions against LGBT people, ranging from the denial of equal legal civil rights in government and the law, to the encouragement or endorsement of job, housing, or public accommodation discrimination, to turning a blind eye toward outright violent hate crimes, or even government-sanctioned murder and execution of LGBT citizens. Given the enormous global frequency of such instances, it can be no wonder that gay men learn to approach all things religious with caution and a reasonable, guarded suspicion toward religious institutions and to the holidays they endorse. Christmas is no exception. In the United States, where I am in a large urban progressive area like Los Angeles, and more specifically the famously gay affirmative city of West Hollywood, where many of the members of the city council are gay or lesbian identified themselves, Christmas is not only for Christians celebrating the religious connotations of the birth of Jesus Christ, but it's also a cultural holiday that gains at least some incidental observance from Jews, Buddhists, agnostics, atheists, and people of all faiths or none. In general, people in Los Angeles are sensitive enough to say happy holidays, not because of the war on Christmas, narcissistic nonsense of aggressive and hostile conservative Christians, but from a much more positive and compassionate regard and respect for acknowledging the diversity of the religions, including none, of the people they encounter daily in the city, without taking the presumptuous and patriarchal stance of saying Merry Christmas when you don't know if the person celebrates that as such. The phrase of happy holidays is not against anyone, but rather a social statement that respects the diversity of a pluralistic society like Los Angeles, and indeed the United States, where the United States motto is not actually "In God We Trust," that's a myth, but actually the motto is "E pluribus unum," the Latin, which means out of the many we are one, meaning the United States. All 50 of our states comprise one nation, and plus the other territories like Puerto Rico. Let's not forget about them, even though the current administration likes to forget about Puerto Rico, but that's another topic. But Los Angeles is home to people from literally hundreds of countries and countless languages. There are over 200 languages that are spoken among peoples in Los Angeles County. So it is the spirit of respect and celebration of diversity that creates the social climate of the season, and this can be found in other progressive and pluralistic geographic areas as well in the United States and really the world over. Since the religious and the cultural and social aspects of Christmas are intertwined, I got to thinking about how the non-religious can appreciate Christmas from a secular humanist point of view. Many histories go into the history of the observance of Christmas in great depth, but it's safe to say that the current celebration as we know it has evolved in relatively recent history. The origins of images like Santa Claus can be traced to the late 19th century, when the jolly chap we know today really got cultural traction, particularly through advertising, including through Coca-Cola in the early 20th century. Some may disagree, but my thought about Santa Claus is that he represents a certain benevolent spirit of goodwill and generosity and cooperation. He also reflects in his legend the age-old wisdom that humans have both a nice and naughty nature, and like an omniscient God, Santa sees all. He sees you when you're sleeping. He knows when you're awake. He knows if you've been bad or good, so be good for goodness sake. This examination of the duality of the nature of man can be seen in both the Santa Claus legend and in the more formal works of Swiss psychiatrist and author and theorist Carl Jung, who theorized that humans have a shadow side that we would do well to acknowledge, like the Eastern yin-yang symbol and concept. Even stories like Robert Louis Stevenson's The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde explore the nature of this duality of man, as would our current spate of superhero movies that, like classical mythology, set up a duality of the hero versus the villain, always in perennial conflict for some kind of control or domination, much like God and the devil. And we tend to emphasize figures like Santa Claus as symbols of goodwill that perhaps reflect the angels of the Bible heralding Christ's birth with promises of a Savior who brings peace on earth, goodwill toward men. Our culture created Santa Claus to embody a sentiment that does and should permeate the season. But goodwill toward men, and I prefer humankind to avoid patriarchal terminology and inherent sexism, is not limited to the Christian faith, much as some like to argue. On the contrary, for gay men, we in general tend to associate Christianity not with the turn the other cheek, goodwill, and infinite compassion of the supposedly original teachings of Jesus Christ, but instead with the swift, steel-toed boot kick in the ass that comes from modern conservative Republican politics, where major political figures, cloaked in euphemistic terms like pro-family or religious freedom for conservative Christians, seek to strip American citizens of equal legal civil rights and protections under the law and endorse outright social and legal oppression of LGBT citizens. Gay men and others from the LGBT community can be understood if they bristle, then, at the religious aspects of Christmas as they reject, or at least apply critical thinking to, the entire religion of Christianity. The atrocities committed against human citizens from the world governments under Islam, especially toward LGBT humans, are a topic for another time, but still important. Gay men really have an objection to outright social violence and even physical violence that's committed in the name of religion. How then does Christmas remain fun for gay men? For some, despite the modern alterations of the original basic Christian tenets, such as profound compassion and forgiveness, they remain observant of their various denominations of a Christian faith, usually from their families of origin. For others, the religious observance of Christmas is de-emphasized, not necessarily in a hostile rejection, although this would be understandable from religious abuse victims and survivors, which basically means all gay men, some more than others, such as reparative therapy survivors, but in mere shift of attention and emphasis to the more cultural and social, secular celebrations of Christmas. Parties, gifts, conversations, sharing food, breaking bread, so to speak, with others, drink, games, dancing, charity events, and even some athletic activities that are Christmas-themed, all of which contribute to a sense of gay community cohesion, celebration, mutual support, respect, and goodwill. But beyond the social, there can be a secular humanist appreciation of Christmas, not necessarily in a Christian or deist context, but an observance of certain concepts in nature. In the pagan spiritual traditions, such as Wicca, the time around Christmas coincides with the Northern Hemisphere's winter equinox, when night and day have equal time. And then after a certain date each year in December, the days begin to get longer until we have sunny skies at 8 p.m. that we come to know by summertime. Many historians note how early Christianity piggybacked or commandeered the pagan festival of Yule, already a time of social and cultural celebration, to coincide and eventually eclipse Yule in favor of Christmas. Some pagan traditions, such as the Yule log, a large log that burns a long time, representing light in the context of some of the darkest days of the year, continue. Even the Christmas tree, a pine tree, has its properties of staying evergreen at a time in winter when most trees are brown and barren. In the pagan story, the god, represented by the sun and gold, impregnates the goddess, represented by the moon and silver, in early fall, who then gives birth to the new sun all over again at Yule, a few months later. Therefore, even nature underscores the celebration of the coming of the light, where the birth of the sun, S-U-N, becomes the birth of the sun, S-O-N. In this way, the natural and the cultural historically became intertwined. Our concepts like peace on earth, good world toward humankind, love your neighbor, sacrifice to others, and practicing compassion even when we really don't want to, limited to Christianity? Of course not. The dominant world paradigm of Christian dogma, in its own narcissistic and self-righteous superior way, would have us believe so, up to and including eternal damnation in the fires of hell if we don't believe as they do. But it would be immature and short-sighted to say that that qualifies of the better nature of humankind are limited to one world dogma. So therefore, can the qualities of the better of nature of man be celebrated not only by non-Christians, but even by people of other religions or no religion at all, by secular humanists? Of course. Take any Christmas tradition, such as gift-giving. We exchange gifts to reflect the biblical lore of the three wise kings who visited the Christ child with gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh, the equivalent today of a Rolex, Chanel No. 5, and black truffles, although what a baby would do with those even today is beyond me. But the story reflects how even kings, figures of great power and world influence, still deferred with respect to the anointed one, even as a newborn infant. The gift is a symbolic representation of how we humbly express affection, respect, validation, and honor to those we love. We don't have to literally believe that in the history of our world a human woman was impregnated by a godlike spirit to deliver a half-man, half-god being to get the concept of why the exchange of gifts can have profound cultural meaning, appealing to our better natures. Or take the Christmas tree. By decorating an evergreen, we are expressing hope that while the trees outside can look dry and bare and brown, we respect nature enough to know that spring is coming. No matter what hardship we face, we have faith and hope that the world goes round and continues its endless circles around the sun, and that our hardships are very likely to find resolution, given a change of season. The ornaments of the tree are symbolic. Carl Jung was big into symbols of the history and nature of our lives, our cultural interests, our travels, family heirlooms, gifts from people we knew, even cultural celebration. I have lots of Hallmark, Wizard of Oz, and superhero themed Christmas ornaments for the tree. My husband has a collection of laser-cut brass ornaments that were annual gifts from his cherished late great aunt. And many would argue that the natural beauty of an evergreen tree is celebration enough, but perhaps our decorating the tree with ornaments represents the interaction of man with nature. Nature gives us the miracle of the evergreen tree, and man then adorns, or burdens it, with plastic and metal gobs just to show nature who's boss. But nature has the last word, for maybe we don't get picked up, dry and shorn, and out on the curb later, but we do ultimately get buried into the same cold ground the tree grew from. We're all going to the same place. Or burned down into essence like the candles that illuminated Christmas trees historically. Whether we're buried or cremated, we all kind of end up kind of in the same way that those trees do. The Christmas wreath represents the circle of life, which also reflects the story of Christ's birth, death, and resurrection over and over, like the seasons of nature through the year, or like the succeeding generations. Even Charles Dickens' story, A Christmas Carol, the Scrooge story, is an analogy of the birth, death of the miser, and rebirth as a generous, kind individual, in this case visited by the three ghosts of past, present, and future. Christians would read this as the born-again nature of embracing that faith. The 1946 movie classic, Frank Capra's It's a Wonderful Life, represents the birth, death, seeing his life as if he had never been born with the help of a heavenly guardian angel, Clarence, and rebirth, learning to live again as the character implores of God in the last scenes of James Stewart's George Bailey Hero. Dr. Seuss's How the Grinch Stole Christmas is yet another death rebirth tale, where in that case the transformation is realizing that people can have joy and celebration internally, even if externally there isn't much seen to be joyous about, because the Grinch stole all the decorations. It is interesting to note that in each of these stories, the actual circumstances of Ebenezer Scrooge, or George Bailey, or even the Grinch, do not actually change. They awaken with the same circumstances they were in before, but what is profoundly changed is their perspective of the current situation as a result of self-reflection and reinterpretation of their circumstances' meaning. For a psychotherapist like me, this reflects the intervention of cognitive reframing, where we might help a client to see a situation from a different point of view that allows for less distress, more empowerment, and enhanced self-efficacy to face life challenges head-on and resolve problems. At gaytherapyla.com, there's also another article that I wrote about resurrection and rebirth called The Secular Appreciation of Easter. Maybe we'll do an episode of that on the spring. Other Christmas stories like O. Henry's The Gift of the Magi vaguely reflect a Christian tenet of self-sacrifice in the name of love, where two young lovers give up a thing that they cherish most in order to afford to give a gift to each other. The Christmas myth, although my use of that word is controversial, yields endless material for other symbolic stories that represent death and rebirth. Even Frosty the Snowman, who melts and dies and then is reborn with a magic hat, which really represents the love of a child to a cherished friend. Or Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, the TV special, which was written in 1964 by the Rankin Bass television animators, is a celebration of diversity and a lesson to appreciate those who are different. A story that has become somewhat anthemic for the LGBT community. Although it's been tragically lost in modern times, where Christian too often has been hijacked by those espousing right-wing politics, which many would argue in its miserliness, superiority, idolatry of money, and lack of compassion represents nothing of true historical Christian values, the messages of Christmas would do well to expand beyond the "Come, all ye faithful," and extend to all peoples, cultures, and faiths of the world, including those who espouse a different religion or no religious dogma at all, but instead emphasize a secular stance of compassion toward all, free of any ecumenical content. Despite those who would violently rage otherwise, it is possible and even desirable. E pluribus unum. The qualities of the better nature of humankind that we evoke and celebrate at one time of year would do well to be held dear in the heart all year long, as Dickens said in A Christmas Carol. So, that's my take on a secular view of Christmas, and wishing everybody a happy holiday season. If you're interested in therapy in California or coaching anywhere outside of California or the U.S. or the world, please get in touch. 310-339-5778 is the phone number, and Ken at gaytherapyla.com is the email. And, of course, much more material, including hundreds of blog articles that are archived, are waiting for you for free at, that's a gift, right? At gaytherapyla.com. And if you can, please give a review or a rating to the podcast. That helps to kind of spread the word. And if you have ideas for future podcast episodes or comments or questions, they are always welcome. Gay Therapy LA on Instagram and on Facebook. And wishing everybody a fun holiday season, however you decide to celebrate it. Take care.